Well, hi, everybody. Just want to say thank you very much for inviting us to speak. Just sorry I'm not there in person. There's been now 4 decades of the so-called war on drugs, and it's done, I think, terrible things to societies everywhere. It's done damage to drug users, it's done damage to their families, it's done damage to their communities. And I believe it's time to support an alternative approach to the prohibitionist framework that has been in effect and been so ineffective for decades now. People who use drugs or have a drug problem should be treated with compassion rather than being criminalized. And yet, every day, people around the world continue to suffer as a result of prohibitionist drug policies. In Russia, repressive drug laws fuel the HIV epidemic, and in Southeast Asia, people who use drugs can be forced into compulsory treatment, which often involves beatings and torture. Not so long ago, I was invited to speak at a TEDx event at Arnwood State Prison in California, which houses more than 3,000 prisoners, many of them non-violent drug offenders. I spoke to prisoners and prison guards about the war on drugs and how true reform of our prison systems depends also on how we address the issue of drug prohibition. The US has just 5% of the world's population, yet disgracefully, it has 25% of the global prison population, outstripping China and Iran. Much of this is driven by the imprisonment of low-level drug offenders, often from poor Black and Hispanic communities. Like many issues, drug policy reform should not be seen in isolation. It has the potential to affect fundamental change in other areas like the penal system or in reducing the negative impact of policing on certain communities. Globally, we are wasting way too much money and way too many other precious resources on incarceration, when we could and should be spending these resources on education, vocational training, and in the case of drug users, on treatment, proper medical care, and re-entry. Let's also not forget the cost of the war on drugs. In the US alone, it costs $50 billion a year. In the UK, the government's own figures estimate that annually, anywhere between 1.5 and 2.5 billion pounds is spent on the enforcement of both drug supply and possession offences. What's more, the UK has one of the highest GDP spends in Europe on drug law enforcement, yet it has among the highest rates of drug use in Western Europe. Looking at this as a businessman, I'd say that's been a pretty bad investment. It's time to try a new model. Well, there are alternatives. As a member of the Global Commission on Drug Policy, we have long advocated for the use of non-criminal sanctions for drug possession and for countries to consider regulating drugs to take the market out of the hands of criminals. And countries such as Portugal, Switzerland, and the Czech Republic, and some states in Australia have all implemented diversionary schemes away from the criminal justice system for possession of drugs. And in these countries and states, drug use has not increased, and individuals who are not criminalized have better outcomes in terms of employment, accommodation, relationships, and they are much less likely to come in contact with a criminal justice system, closing the revolving door of recidivism. One added benefit to society is that robberies by drug users almost becomes a thing of the past. In Uruguay and 2 US states, Colorado and Washington, cannabis has been regulated and is subject to quality, age, and access controls. These reforms should be applauded. Not only does it undermine organized crime, it reduces the number of people at risk of criminalization and therefore at risk of imprisonment. Drug policy reform is not just about drugs, it is about much wider societal issues that we should all be concerned about. And in 2016, world leaders will meet for a global summit on drugs at the United Nations. We need our politicians to be brave, and we need them to look at alternatives to the current repressive policies. Anyway, I just want to say thanks for listening. I wish I could actually hear you, but I can't, so I'm not going to be able to join in the discussion, but wish you a fruitful discussion and a really good few days. Cheers. Thank you.